Good evening, everybody. Um, Welcome to the poetry reading. I'm gonna try to make this as laid back and as informal as possible. I hope all of you enjoy everything that's read here today. Some really good poets. I think we're gonna see a different uh, sort of a variety of work, which is always good. Um, I'm gonna introduce read the bios of our poets. Um, but my name is Jerriod Avant. I am a graduate student um, at the University of Rhode Island, working on an English PhD. I'm a poet, um, and I will be the moderator this evening. I am nervous, but I'm also excited to hear the poems. So I'm going to read the bios, and we'll each read for 10 minutes. And then I'll ask a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. All right. So Mag Gabbert is the author of the forthcoming collection, Sex, Depression, Animals, from Mad Creek Books, 2023. Winner of the 2021 The Journal Charles B. Wheeler Prize in Poetry. Her work can be found in Plaids, the Paris Review Daily, the Massachusetts Review, Waxwing, and other publications. She has a PhD in creative writing from Texas Tech University and an MFA from the University of California at Riverside. She's received poetry fellowships from Idlewild Arts and Poetry at Round Top, and in 2021, she was awarded a 92 Street Y Discovery Award. Mag teaches at Southern Methodist University and serves as the interviews editor for Underblong Journal. Roger Reeves has earned his PhD from the University of Texas, Austin, and is the author of Best Barbarian from NORTON 2022 and Kingming from Copper Canyon Press 2013. Winner of the Larry Levis Reading Prize, the Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Literary Award, and a John C. Zachariah First Book Award. He is the recipient of a Whiting Award and a Pushcart Prize, as well as fellowships from Cave Canem, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Poetry Foundation, and Princeton University. An associate professor of poetry in the English department at University of Texas, Austin. Welcome, Mac.
Is this on? Yes. Hi, y'all. This is an interesting setup to kind of hold this. I feel a little bit like, I don't know, too important. So I'm going to read a couple of brand new poems. I always feel like that's a good way to break them in. And then I'll read a few from my forthcoming collection. This first poem is called The Dream of Flying. Last night I spread honeycomb across little discs of bread, and a man told me again not to get too attached. Later on we undressed, but he left my bra clasped, kept running his fingers over my knot skin. It took me a long time to understand Icarus, just like I can't see where this poem is headed, even though I keep taking steps. Where is the cliff? The man I'm not with knows about the one time I went skiing, how I was too afraid to jump off the lift. And I know that the man broke his whole skeleton on the side of a mountain against a tree, so now there's metal inside of him. I can feel it, but only in certain positions. If pleasure means the conversion of desire into possession, then pleasure must be the sun isn't on fire, because fire can't breathe without oxygen. The sun burns itself instead, like fat. The sun is a bomb that has to keep exploding or else it will collapse. It is a bomb that's contained by nothing except. The hallway outside the man's bedroom always fluoresces, like heaven. Last night I left before I could even see my hands. Try to stay there. Okay. This poem's called The Dream of Reincarnation. He's always wanted to pee between the legs of a woman as she sits on the toilet. So I let him. Sometimes I read books while he listens. He keeps a gun in the drawer beside the bed. Once, he took out the magazine and laid the rest on my stomach. It was cold, heavier than you'd expect. Ravelli says a storm is a collection of occurrences. A lucky thing. My love language is the one in which verbs consume their own nouns, like drinking this drink, living my life, fishing for fish. The man tells me he's always pictured going down like a flame, whatever that means. I'm a little afraid I could die in my sleep and then not realize I'm dead. I like when he puts his hand around my neck, holds it there until the edges go thin, releases, and I come back together like birds settling onto their branches, calling out from one limb to another, again, again. This is the last of the new poems I'm going to read. As you can probably tell, they're part of a series, and it's called The Myth of Physics. 2 weeks after the surgery, he has a seizure underneath me, lets go of my waist, drifts away, only for a few seconds, with tendons playing like light plays. He doesn't seem afraid. The second law of thermodynamics states that only one thing separates the past from the future. It could be easy to manipulate. There are places beyond this that still only even exist as theoretical equations, places made of chance. But I'm like a child who kicks at the spray-painted arrows across a playground's loose gravel, hoping to stop its demolition. Oh, recklessness. I keep wondering why time is the most frequently used noun in our language, keep envisioning a dress even though I'm undressed, keep thinking about Orpheus and why he couldn't help looking back. The night darkens and pricks, sulfuric. This man flickers in and out of my days like a glitch. I already miss my whole life. I don't want it to end. Yesterday at the gym, a man walked up beside me, got onto the next treadmill and stood straddling the belt. He kept turning up the speed but just stayed there, still, watching it run like light years between his feet. All right, so these poems are from Sex, Depression, Animals. This particular piece would fall under the animal category. It's called Rat. And it, for what it's worth, it looks like a square. It's the end of 2020, the year of the rat. My mother has finally left my stepdad, who once called my sister and me white trash, cheaply dressed, the offspring of a crackhead. I still struggle with, am defined by, abandonment. I'm still told I'd be cute, except I show too much skin. On TV, a woman says, if you're about to be raped, you might save yourself by claiming you have an infectious disease. Imagine being violated because you looked clean, or being violated because you deserved it. Either way, blamed, caged. In New York, the sidewalk has split open and dropped a man into its underground pit. Imagine minding your business, then some dude breaks in. Imagine being surrounded by men whose only interest is your grimace, pain's measurement. Imagine even the root of your name, the name you were given, meaning to scrape, gnaw, or eat away. This is, among my friends, famously, my love poem to Theodore Roosevelt. It's called America. What does it mean to be in love with Theodore Roosevelt? To lust for another man wearing loose-fitted khaki, hat folded and tilted at the brim, who owns a horse unsurprisingly named Texas, talks about how much he loved shooting another man and says he doubled up neatly as a jackrabbit, and whose own men said they would have gone to hell with him, knowing that I have also killed a few things, insects mostly, a squirrel once with my car at 16, later a field mouse and a possum while driving across Texas. Like Teddy, I have always eaten meat, though I can only stomach fishing. And even then I think of the sound, thrashing, inside the red and white cooler, how it must feel. And I'm gonna close with one of my personal favorite poems of mine, also in Sex, Depression, Animals, also an animal poem. I call it my hell poem. The title, though, is Goat. Because every man I've ever slept with has wandered off to have kids, but later fucked me again. Because I can't seem to pick a religion. Because during sex ed, my teacher showed us a little box with an open slot on her desk, told us to write down our questions and slip them in. Because the first note read, "Does sex really make women scream?" Because the ancient Greek word tragoidia, which meant goat song, somehow turned into the modern English tragedy. Because my dad's nickname for me is Smelly. Because for a long time I heard the word bleat as bleed. Because this song is sweet. It is sweet. Because God told his people to bring him 2 goats. He said they should give one their sins and let it go, and they should slit the other's throat. Because my brother claims he needs a new razor for manscaping. Because childless mothers are called nannies. Because Jesus won't help me. And one night, when a friend and I were 15, we took a late train to a faraway party, and a man approached us, whispering, "Would you rather be stabbed or sliced?" Because hell is an animal with other animals inside it, because every choice I've made involved sacrifice, because I am always the one that got away. Thank you.
Grendel, all lions must lean into something other than a roar. James Baldwin, for instance, singing Precious Lord. His voice as weary as water broken over his scalp, and a storefront church's baptismal pool all those years ago when he wanted to be somebody's child and on fire in that being. Lord, I want to be somebody's child, and chosen water spilling over their scalp, water taking the shape of their longing, a deer diving into evening traffic, and the furrow drawn in the air over the hood of the car, power, and wanting to be something alive and open. Lord, I want to be alive and open, a glimpse of power, the shuffle of a mother's hand over a sleeping child's forehead, as if clearing the city's rust from its face, which we mostly are. A halo of rust, a glimpse of power. James Baldwin leaning into the word light, his voice jostling that single grain in his throat as if he might drop it or already has. I'm calling to that grain of light, to that gap between his teeth where the many of us fatherless sleep and bear and be whatever darkness or leaping thing we can be. In James Baldwin's mouth, my difficult beauty, my weak and worn, my future as any number of angels, which is not unlike the beast Grendel, coming out of the wild heaven into the hills and halls of the mead house at the harpist's call, with absolute prophecy in his breast, and a desire for mercy, for a friend, an end to drifting and loneliness. And in that coming down, out of the hills, out of the trees, for once, bringing humans the best vision of themselves, which of course must be slaughtered. My name is Roger Reeves. I live in Austin generally, and so I'm just going to read some poems. I probably won't say much in between them. I think the poems do all the talking. Cocaine and gold. I never wanted to be this far into the business of heaven, chasing my father, hunting his soul in the corn and confusion of this harvest. My father, who is hidden in the last sheaf of heaven, maybe heaven itself. My father, the corn wolf, who we must kill, but is already dead. We will learn nothing here of sacrifice or the cocaine of beauty. My hands chattering in eulogy, which is a search for order, which is nothing but the elimination of beauty by artifice. By artifice, we carterize my father's drifting life, a minor cosmetic surgery, like liposuction. A funeral is an elimination of nature by artifice. By artifice, do you repeat yourself? Very well then, I repeat myself as heaven, as a golden harvest, as a broken ocean of corn. The search for beauty is the elimination of death, which requires dying, which is the business of farming, which no one cares to do in America anymore. And like dying, we'd rather rent it out. Freedom without freedom. To hold your dying father up to a razor beneath a golden light and cut him finally in and out of the world. Rat among the pines. Terror tonight is the moon slipping from a rat's gray grasp, finding its way back into the sky, which is America. A white moon leaning on the night's neck with its hands in its pocket. Moon hung calm above catastrophe, the police breaking the neck of a man who had just brushed summer's first beat of rain from his eyelashes, who, knocking a Newport against the wrist, watching smoke break its head against a brick wall, is preparing to die, unaware they are preparing to die. Heavy the moon, silly the tasking of a rat with delaying death. Terror tonight is the candor of the earth, where someone is preparing to die, and the earth receives that dying with its hands in its pockets. And the moon that once burnt the silk hump of a rat back in the sky. And my daughter hiding in the rose bushes, asking who the sirens have come to kill. And someone calling it beautiful, summer, moon, and someone dying beneath that beauty, which is America. Fun poem. Future from beyond the voice of God. What shall be done with the demand for more selfies? Selfies of the crow in the wheat knocking against the window. Selfies of my daughter hooting like an owl and beating the back of her cage, the back of her bones. Selfies of Wittgenstein's eyes settling on the back of a crow, which is the shadow of a boy delivering milk to the door of his mother, where language began begins Gertrude Stein over the Stambergassi eating salt fish and conch fritters with Aimé Césaire. More selfies of Negroes from Niger and New Orleans, blue black and the blue black buck and canter of summer, and Yves Saint Laurent glasses and pinafores of light pinned to the eyes. No church in the wild, but more selfies of Susie Asada buck dancing on balustrades near the nigger cemeteries, where the chariot swung so low, we just called them commas. We about to fuck up some commas, yeah. Gerrymander and Jack Johnson the shit out of shit. Why do white women love black men? Because we eat cold eels and think distant thoughts. Jack Johnson, we need more selfies. Selfies of Frederick Douglass's pen removed from the gashes in his feet and writing hot checks for Rolexes and rivers our bodies just can't cash. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. We about to fuck up some trauma, yeah. Selfie and holler, yeah. Instagram at the ashram with Little Weezy and Wardell Curry Jr., not senior, busting 3-pointers, yeah. On behalf of a local charity that sends mosquito nets to children in Africa, the Sudan, Niger, I don't know. Tiger, tiger burning bright. Tiger, tiger hanging from the street light. Distant thought. I'm so in time, I'm out of time. So selfie, I'm healthy. I mean, I'm saying though, you know what I'm saying? So that poem had a lot of allusions. You probably heard some of the Kanye. There's Future, the rapper. You know, we fucking up some commas. That quote. There's Blake, and then there's obviously some Gertrude Stein, some Wallace Stevens. But the question was asked once of Jack Johnson: why do white women love black men? And his answer was what I said: because we eat cold eels and think distant thoughts. And I just thought that's the best answer ever to a non-question. If you ever need like that, is like perfect. It doesn't make sense, but it makes all the sense in the world, right? So for the last poem, I'll read this poem called Journey to Sanchin de Nanda. And it takes its title from Alice Coltrane album and from a song of Alice Coltrane's. Alice Coltrane figures really deeply into this book. And the last line I have to alert you to is my daughter. My daughter is a 4-year-old. Well, at the time she was 4 when she said this line, but she's a budding some type of artist. She loves poems, and now she wants to be a DJ. So during the pandemic, I would read poems to her, and often she would respond with her own poems. And so this last line that you will hear is actually from a poem. One day I'll never forget. She said to me in May, I think, of the pandemic of 2020, and I was like, "Hey, can I use that?" She was like, "Yeah, but you have to tell them it's me." So, Journey to Sanchin de Nanda. Alice Coltrane, her harp fills in the cracks of me with gold. The Japanese call it kintsugi, where the vessel broken only gold will permit its healing, its history. It's how the stars understand us. Lemon flowers on the skin of the earth. Mosquito filled with the blood that sirens its fat, long life. Who isn't dying to leave this house, to go masked only in the shadow of one's animal breathing, lonesome, unprotected, knowing nothing lives as foreignness or death? The black dog with a sword in his mouth, passing from house to house, will not bring its itch, its ticks and locks clogging our lungs, a permanent quarantine. Nothing that a little gold melted to ichor and spilled into the veins won't seem. Everything is a blue divergence on a harp. The red bells and the purple crepe myrtle this morning, forgetting that soon they will be the corpses the spring tree kneels to observe. No, no, they remember, as everything dying remembers its mother's name. Say your mother's name, not for power, but for the glimpse of power, to be more than a hesitation. Gold filling in the cracks, a window thrown open for no other reason than to continue a blue feeling. Nothing needed other than this devotion to darkness, a fire gotten brighter, my daughter holding my small name in her mouth, light broken, beloved, my daughter, a window thrown open, her voice, gold filling in the cracked basketball court of me, announcing all nature will be dead for life soon.
It's such a loud, quiet evening. I love it so much. Missing person. Last time home, I saw a pair of shoes tucked into a corner, and it looked as if they hadn't been moved since he was here. The dust on them sacred, and still, when I'm home, my mind labors in the dust. It's been 6 years, but I say it hasn't happened. Though the day persists, he's still tucked into a cloud, tucked into a tree, in the back of a long black car, and my throat won't let my heart through, no matter how flat my epiglottis falls. All about the day breaking is clean, so why this horror? A nightmare in my wake. A black silk blend pressed smooth, upholstering silent emotion, boldly not a dent on him. We dare name this night with its sun out high, hanging by its hands, where the room was too small to be holding so much ache. Our worlds now captured by a piece of forest carved tightly, hinges now let us in or shut us out, but they failed to shut him in. A tree uprooted, the one I fell from, and I'm the only one to find him showing up in my day. Meetings, business trips scattered him, and I knew he'd be back, but not back so soon or in this form. And the way I am nervous about it all, if I am losing it, and if he's gone, how is he here with me? The dining room table and altar where we open all bodies, either give or take, how his form sits in cheer, naked torso, and you are to act as if his generous breasts aren't private parts. I don't see how I see what I'm seeing. My eyes shaping a silhouette of the man who raised me as the sun raises all of our sleepy shadows. What gives when two realms refuse to budge and won't make their way completely to either world? Imagination is a long, worn leather belt spread around my only hope. This yearning for Pops to adjourn a meeting he's not in. Get home to build dinner around venison, a staple holding us full. The dates leading up, I never get wrong. Their quick succession still stings. It seems I'm always in a reality I shouldn't be in. Somehow our home preserves certain fingerprints. I map them and become bored with the maps of this world. I would abandon one rim for another when I watch him swing into the driveway and catch his breath from the day before exiting the vehicle. I watch him honk the horn before he's honking it. Passes me a crisp $50 bill because I'm there. Hands me baskets of new pecans and muscadines we'll use. I hear him telling me how I'm trying to split the log against the grain and how that'll wear me out the same way lying will. The same way alcohol will my liver, and how not cleaning the yard will eat away at the lawnmower's blades. I got a thing for fumbling through couplets. I hear him asking, have I talked to mama? And he knows I have, and what I'm about to say, how I'm knocking on the window of this other realm, begging to sing my confusion until he understands me. I'm 1,154 miles from home, farther from him, and still we continue the secret of running into each other. Felonious states of adjectival excess featuring comparative and superlative forms. My mo favoriter and mo better is my most favoritist. It's mo simpler this way. It's mo fluider, mo wetter, most hottest, cause the most beautifulest is mo beautifuler, mo meaner, mo flyer, and most flyest. Most shyer and the most shyest is more than more intelligenter than the panels is most ugliest, and most selectivist. It's the most goodest. It's the most burntest. It's mo burnter. And mo unrulier, it's the most meekest, and even mo meeker, it's the most ownablest. It's mo purchasabler. And the most purchased, thus, becomes the most purchasablest at the sight of the most shiniest coins. My most funkiest is also my most stolenest. But the most stolenest can't ever be more funkier than the most oldest. The most thievingest be the most brokest, 'cause the most thieved from be the most oldest. So becomes the most richest, who also be the most fundedest. And that makes me the most confusedest. When I'm in the most keptest buildings that be more kepter than all the most time keeping his cats, they keep in the back upkeeping. Thank you. I've got about 3 more, and we're going to get into some questions. Pride. Give me memories as slow to leave as snails. In foreign and perhaps fragile years, I'll still be able to recognize semen and expect the smoke. Champ's name causes no stress to fill the mouth, quieter than fear or any of fear's cousins. Vernice takes 9 specific peels between spoons of grits and long sips of an instant coffee I love. Robert never told us he was ill, though surely he knew. I've seen knowledge eat large men alive over a summer. Muscadines on center stage as the native grape. The thick skin, the teeth pierce, breaks to pour sweetly across the tongue. Look how I hunger where there is no hunger. Look how Pops left before we thought he was done. Listen how the voice of a dead man can live. Pack me a bag I can fit in my heart. The letter man. Guilt led a man to root for 3 weeks it snowed. Milk fed a land the coop, but she free we blowed. Quilt set a fan to scoop, 'cause he beat these lows. Silt led a van a moot, but we teach these codes. Kilt wetter than a noose, for he sleep, he chokes. Built better than the truth, but he cheap as votes. Built better than the truth, but he cheap as votes. Built better than the loot, but he sneeze, he broke. Kilt wetter than the noose, for he sleep, he chokes. Quilt set a fan to scoop, 'cause he beat these lows. Milk fed a land the coop, but she free we blow. Guilt led a man to root for 3 weeks it snowed. What deer season means to me. In the house, there were always 2 white deep freezers packed pretty decent with red meat. Deer season, the hunters and the deer would satisfy rent in season by meat, if not by cash. It was May, I was 15, and we smelled 15 or so throughout the warm insides of the manhandled school bus. When Pops steers quick and clear to dodge the deer, and Charlene yells, "I didn't even know it was deer season." As if deer only live so they could be killed during deer season. What's a deer outside of deer season, except the reason for deer season? Seventh period language arts. Both cut the rope the phone. Both snuck a smoke for home. Both up 'cause of woke the domes. Both trust to cloak the zone. Both fuck 'cause the yoke the wrong. Both 'cause of stroke the long. Both rub just to poke the bone. Both love was a joke alone. Both love was a joke wrong. Both rub just to poke the bone. Both 'cause of stroke the long. Both fuck 'cause the yoke the wrong. Both trust to cloak the zone. Both up 'cause of woke the domes. Both cut the rope the phone. Both snuck a smoke for home. Questions? Before I forget, Roger, you mentioned that Alice Coltrane is essential sort of to the arc of Best Barbarian. Can you speak to sort of the arc of Best Barbarian and how Alice Coltrane?
Sure. Yeah, so that's a great. I have to start with a little story. Can I start with a little narrative, even though we're in the poetry room?
Absolutely.
I first heard Alice Coltrane when I was in undergrad and broke as hell living in Atlanta in the SWATs in the hood, and I was staying with a friend, and all we could do was listen to the radio. Like we had no money. Like this is the early 2000s. We had no money. We couldn't even we could buy eggs and bread. And I remember one night it was storming, and they played. I had never heard like harp and jazz, and they played Alice Coltrane playing the harp, which is Journey to San Chindanada. And I heard this, and I was like, it was the most transcendent thing I had ever heard. And I saved up my money, and I went out and I bought this Alice Coltrane CD. And I played that CD over and over again, and I lost it in a move to grad school or something. And then, Spotify came out, and I had about $10 more, so I could give me a little Spotify subscription. And I started listening to Alice Coltrane again, because everybody listens to John, right, her husband. But Alice Coltrane was actually a genius unto herself. By 16, she was playing concerts. She was actually classically trained. She is an amazing spirit, right? And then she sort of had this conversion. You may have heard of the Church of John Coltrane. She started that church, and which is kind of like a church based on like a love supreme, right? And it so I've just followed her music for about 20 years. And then when I was in the pandemic, I decided to do this thing, which was to listen to all of my favorite artists from beginning to end. So to listen to everything so I started with Ornette Coleman. I started with his first album and listened to all like 60 albums. And then I did this with a few other people, and I did it with Alice Coltrane as I was making this book. And I was doing this with my daughter, right? And so my daughter would be like, I just feel like she's going to get enough pop bullshit. So, I'm going to indoctrinate her with jazz. And as I was making this book, I started realizing, I think that the form of the book is actually kind of like an Alice Coltrane quintet. And so if you look at the book, when you open the book, you'll see the first section is 20 poems. Then there's 2 single poem sections, and then there's another 20 poem section. And that to me is the way jazz is built, right? So you have the melody, Then you have two solos, and these two versions of the solo are the type of solo you would hear sort of in the late 60s, early 70s, and you have like a post-bop sort of solo, and then you also have kind of like a avant-garde sort of solo, and that's the one called Something About John Coltrane, which is another Alice Coltrane tune. And that actual form of that poem, it's a durational form. So if you turn on the song Something About John Coltrane and start reading it as you're listening to the music, it will end, the poem will end if you, at about the same time, it might be 10 seconds, but it generally it's that poem is 9 minutes and 41 seconds. And so for me, the sort of presiding form, the presiding aesthetic for me is Alice Coltrane, right? And sort of what she opens up in terms of thinking about nature and life and beauty, and music and possibility, and something like a harp and jazz, right? Which I think is kind of we now have Brandy Younger. I don't know if you guys know who she is, but she's a younger African-American harp player that's playing jazz. Really, really amazing. You should check out her music. But it's an odd instrument for jazz, right? We might think of it as an odd instrument. And so I kind of think of myself in that way, right? Like I'm kind of an odd instrument in poetry. So that's the way. It's a long answer, but that's how Alice Coltrane plays into the book.
No, that's wonderful. I don't know about Mag, but when I generally think about collections of poems, I don't come into the structure of a jazz quintet or quartet, like sort of laying out the book, thinking about the melody, thinking about solos, and having those be sectioned. I think that's a wonderful way to.
That's not the way I started. I just started with, like, I got a bunch of poems, and I had to make them make sense.
Right.
And the only way that I could make them make sense during it was, oh, you kind of already think like a musician when you write. I play music, and so therefore, why don't you just build this kind of like you would imagine a jazz song? And I was like, oh. And then it made it so much fun, because then it also taught me how to revise the book. Because once I had the melody, then I was like, okay, we're gonna repeat the melody, but I'm not gonna repeat it in the same way like in a jazz song. I would have to repeat it with some difference, right? So it made me think, oh, formally, I need a poem that does this formally in the last section, right? So there's two abecedarians. There's an abecedarian in the front, abecedarian in the back. I need these couplets. I need an ode. Okay, I have this ode, right? And so it made me think about forms and how to like sort of negotiate all those forms.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. Mag, Sex, Depression, Animals, forthcoming. So you must have recently had to, or probably still are, going through what you sort of envision for the layout of the poems that appear in Sex, Depression, Animals, right? Yeah. What have you had to sort of battle through or dismiss, or what have you sort of leaned into in thinking about that?
So the book's form was kind of a journey, because the forming of the book was a journey, and then ultimately the process of sending out versions of a manuscript, this was like a years-long deal. And that whole time, for me, it was really key to continue to tinker with it. And sometimes I would this is over the course of like 5 years. Like 2 times I totally overhauled the book entirely. And so it had a few different titles along the route. The first title, which I still want to use for something because I kind of like it, was I Could Go to Sleep Right Now. And then the second title was Blow. I was thinking about iterations of like impact, different kinds of impact. And then ultimately it started as a joke. Like one of my friends was like, well, I mean, you have these themes here pretty clearly. You could just call it Sex, Depression, Animals. And then I was kind of like, actually, yeah, maybe I will. And it's funny because even though it was a joke, people tend to comment that they like that title. So then the challenge was, kind of thinking about how to like separate the work in that way. And I quickly realized that like all of my poems could go in the depression section, but there needed to be some kind of differentiation. The animal poems were easy because they all just have animal titles. They're kind of written in the bestiary traditions. They're not always about animals, but they engage somehow with the idea of the animal. And so it's got these 3 sections. They are not labeled as such, but the implication is that it goes in that order: sex, depression, animals. And then in between depression and animals, there's a section called The Breakup. And it's a poem titled The Breakup. And it's basically, so for those of you who have any knowledge of like the sort of formal things poets do, it'll be each section of the poem is a sentence that is repeated below it, but as the subsequent repetitions go down, there's an erasure that happens. And so it looks like it's kind of dissolving on the page. And I'm finding these other words inside the words that will make a kind of story. So just as an example, like one is, the first line is, "The manicurist paints my nails the color of pink seashells." And then from there it goes, "The man ain't my hell, he is an ale or pin, manic pain, ashes in the sea." So, it's to break up the book. But then I ended up kind of making that poem. Now it's a longer thing, so it might also be a chapbook someday. But there's just 5 little sections of that. And then I too have a section that is a single poem, but mine's just a little short guy at the very end after the depression section, or animals rather.
Nice. I asked this question selfishly because I'm currently working on a manuscript, and I'm thinking about how do I order these poems? Like, other than just putting them together by theme, like what other more imaginative ways can I sort of build into the book? Yeah.
It's funny, Jericho Brown used to always say this thing, and it was really helpful. It was stultifying for a long time because it took me about 10 years to understand it. But he says, you need to have a metaphor. Everybody has to have a metaphor when you're building a book of poetry. And he was like, whatever your metaphor is, so my metaphor is a jazz song, right, or a jazz quartet, right? That will help you build it. So like for my first book, I was like, I call it the fire hose. The poems just all come at you, right? There's no section break, so it's just like water hitting you in the face, right? And so I think like another way to think about it as you're putting it together is one of the things helps me is to stop thinking about the poem as the desk that I made, but the desk that now needs to go into a room. So it's interior designing versus making an art object. And that is a very different way. And it takes a second because I'm not like this is why it took me so long to come up with a second book, because I was like, man, I don't have a metaphor. I got a bunch of poems. I got probably about 6 books worth of poems. But I had no way of thinking about organizing them because I don't think that way. I just like making like a desk or a chair, right? I don't want to make a lamp, right? I don't want to be like, oh, let's put some furniture in the house. I don't give a shit about furniture. In that sense, I like the art object. Yeah. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm definitely like stuck on the art object.
I feel you.
About to throw all these chairs.
Exactly. Put all these motherfuckers in the house. I got 60 of them. just read them.
All right. Quick, before we go to any audience questions. First encounter with a poem, the poet, and the poet that you maybe return to the most.
I love that you're just looking at me like it's implied that I'm going first.
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I have a couple of kind of different answers to this question. I feel like
See, I knew you would.
the first encounter with poetry that I had that was just really striking to me and memorable is not probably the one that a lot of folks would expect, especially if you know anything about my work. I went to Trinity University for undergrad and got to study with Jenny Brown. And I was lucky enough to be in one of her classes when I was like I think I was a freshman. Wasn't really supposed to be in there. And there was this Scottish poet who she had come out, which my people are Scottish for whatever that's worth, but I've never been there. But Robin Robertson, he came out to give a reading, and he was reading from this book, Swithering, and he just like his voice sounded like the sea. Like it was so amazing, and I was truly entranced hearing him read these lovely, descriptive, just lush poems. So that was a turning point for me, strange as it may sound. But like I rotate in terms of the poets and the poems that I go back to time and again. And I often, part of my process is that on any particular day, if there's like a poem that's really speaking to me or a kind of technique that I really want to attempt something with, I'll print a poem out so I can look at it, or print multiple poems out. Even if I have the books, like I want it on the page so I can maybe make some marginalia or just whatever, have it there flat, easy to see. Lately, I've been on a really big Sandra Lim kick, because the poets, they just, yeah, I have some like longtime favorites, but they still kind of ebb and flow, But Sandra Lim has been really, really big for me lately. And then I also did just read Frank Sonnets. That book and Obit, the thing that I want so bad in some point in my career, you read Victoria Chang's Obit or you read Frank Sonnets, it's Diane Seuss's recent, what was it, the Penn?
National Book Critics.
National Book Critics Circle Award winner, yeah. It feels like these poems are written in this kind of fever rush. They flow together. And like when you read it, each of those books, that this poet is never exiting the creative flow the whole time. They're in it, like deep. And that's what's getting them to this place where they can riff in really exciting ways on their forms and on their subject matter, because both of those books are heavily thematic. And just to hit that kind of vein, and be able to mine it all the way through, like that is the thing that I aspire to, I think, the most, or what excites me the most about like possibilities for the future.
When you hit a vein, you want to stay right there. You want to keep your finger on it.
It's so interesting because I was having this conversation with Suzanne Sharif, and she was saying, like, this was years ago. She was like, "What are you? Are you a mole or a fox as a writer?" And what you've just described is what we would call the mole. Wallace Stevens is a mole, right? They sort of find a vein and they stay in it, right? And they'll pretty much stay in that vein for years and maybe over many books. Like Wallace Stevens is never not trying to figure out aesthetics, right? It's never not, it's always about him talking about like, what is a poem? What is art, right? Art, poetry as the supreme fiction. So it's funny because I feel like I'm a fox, right? Which means I'm gonna leap from book to book. I'm gonna, like in this book, I'll be here. The next book, hopefully I'll be like over in Lithuania because I've traveled that far in terms of distance, right? And so for me, it's interesting because I see myself more like, like a leaper. Like I think like to me, the ultimate Fox musician is like Stevie Wonder, right? Like he sounds so different album to album, but they're always like when he was like in his synth phase, and then he was like in the reggae phase, right? And then he was like in the funk phase, and like he's had so many phases, right? So I do love that vein, right? But I'm also like, oh, what about the leaping? But to answer your question, my first time a poem was really church. I grew up in a Pentecostal church, and we used to have to memorize poems from like being like 2 and 3 in the church for the season, right? So it was like Christmas, when you were 2, you had a real simple speech, Jesus is the reason for the season, right? And then as you got older, you got a more complicated one. And my mom used to she was like the head of the youth program, so she always would cut out the speeches and mimeograph them. This is before Xerox, y'all. I'm old enough to remember mimeograph. And those were my like first experiences with poetry, was around like Christian churchy poems. And then I remember my first sort of secular experience with poems, because I grew up in the Pentecostal church, so it's be like secular. Um, and the secular experience was actually in third grade. We used to have these elocution contests. I don't know if we still do this anymore, where you had to memorize a poem and recite it like artfully, right? And it was judged. And it was like first, second, third place, right? And this year, the teachers were smart. I can't believe we had teachers like this, but they were two youth poets, or two young people's poets. You either could pick a Shel Silverstein poem or Jack Prelutsky, right? And everybody picked Shel Silverstein, but I went with Jack Prelutsky. And I remember memorizing Gus's Greasy Spoon, and it was a funny ass poem, right? And so that was like my first really like, oh man, right? Like this poem. And then they kept doing elocution contests, and in fifth grade, I chose a Byron poem. I shouldn't have did that. That shit was difficult. It was also like 120 lines, right? I got through about 40 of them, and I was like, but I should have just used the rhyme scheme to figure it out. But so that was my like first sort of forays into poems. And in fifth grade, we had the first like writing contest, and I put in my little poem about the springtime, and it didn't win. So I didn't write poems again until high school, because I thought I was a terrible poet because I didn't win no contest. I didn't understand like you just write poems and don't win. That's part of being a poet. But the poet I keep returning to recently, it's funny. Again, this is like the same time I was listening to Alice Coltrane broke in my underwear in my apartment in Atlanta, is Zbigniew Herbert. He's a Polish poet. Czesław Miłosz translated his work. Brilliant, but like imaginative. And I think that's where my obsession with angels came from, because he did all these things with angels. And what's funny is I have his work, and every few years I'm always pulling it down. It's always new to me. Every time I'm reading, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And so I literally have it here with me in Dallas. So like when you ask that question, Zbigniew Herbert, and then the other poet is Mahmoud Darwish. He's a Palestinian poet, passed now, and his work has been translated by an American poet, a Jordanian American poet, Fadi Judah, who lives in Houston. And Mahmoud Darwish is an amazing, amazing poet. And so, like for me, it's two poets in translation, to be honest with you. And so I know I'm not even reading it because I can't read Arabic. So I know, it's an approximation. I definitely can't read Polish. But those are the two poets.
Nice, nice. Any questions from the audience? I'm sure we're out of time, but I do want to entertain some questions.
I had a question for the group. Do you all know CPR? Specifically for Meg, and I'm sorry about the clumsiness of the way I'm going to put this. You read some amazing poems, and in them I felt you were making these dizzying jump cuts, but purposefully not connecting them for us, which really struck me. And I'm like, is she going for revenge there? Or giving us an opportunity to save ourselves there? Or how would you describe that? Because it really struck me.
I mean, to me, kind of what you've just described is how I think about the lyric. That it's sort of defined by that gap, this leap, where the idea is for intuitively the reader to come along with me on the, associatively on this journey. And so, and then like the spark of it, the tension of the poem is born out of the need to fill that space, with your mind. And so, yeah, I try to do that. I definitely, I'm flattered that you see that in the work or hear it. Yeah, the early poems that I read, they're all in this kind of prose format, a little bit of a broken up prose format. And just going back to Jerrod's question earlier about like influence and things like that, I began writing these poems after really meditating on some of Sarah Mangusa's prose poems. Really, really love, her work, and so that form came out of thinking about the way she makes those kinds of leaps and how rich that felt for me. There's like a kinetic energy. There's a kind of electricity that comes from that. Thanks.
I thought this was a great reading, and it's one of the few poetry readings I've ever been to where I didn't get enough. And I mean, that's not a slam on the other readings, but it's like it's a compliment to y'all. I mean, I wanted more. So from every single one of you, there are a lot of strong lines, and I mean, with Mag, hell is an animal containing other animals.
Hell's an animal with other animals.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And
I should
Jerriod,
say that comes from an idea that came from Jorge Luis Borges.
that's all right. We steal.
Yeah, no, oh yeah, no, but I say this, it's about the monster Acheron, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I love Borges' work, and there's this book that it's like a index of fantastic beasts, sort of, and that's the way in which Borges describes that monster.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Jerriod, and I'm gonna get it wrong, but the most richest is also the most fundedest.
No, you get that right.
Yeah. That just killed me. But anyway, all right. So I once read like an interview with Ted Williams. They said, Ted, how do you hit so well? And the interviewer was really good and started getting into the breathing. Like, what are you thinking? What's your breathing like? What are your eyes doing? And so when you're working, you are trying for that line, that right line. And like you are like, I gotta have it, I gotta have it, I gotta get it. What's the physical sensation of that? What is going on with you and your body and your mind as you're trying to get there?
It's like them days when you try on 6 outfits before you leave the house. Like sometimes it'll come down to like a syllable count, and there's only so many things that will fulfill that will make sense, and then you have to decide whether or not you want to sacrifice intelligibility for sound or sound for intelligibility. It's I don't know. I feel like I have so many like words at my disposal at that time. Like I don't know. It's like picking through a bunch of little small things.
Does it hurt?
No, I think it's fun for me because I'm always saying these things out loud. I'm trying them out in my mouth and in my body, and so your body will tell you when you get it right, and so I try to make sure it goes through my body. And what about y'all?
I feel like there's no better place for me when I'm working on a poem than when it is like I'm down to a couple words that I need to figure out. That's like an exciting on the cusp moment when up until that point, I'm not ever 100% sure if this is really gonna fly. Yeah, and for me, kind of as you suggested, like when I land on that word, I know it. I figure that out pretty quick. So it's a good feeling. But like physically, I don't know about y'all, but I feel like when I wake up and begin my day, I have a good sense of whether I would write well that day. That's not to say that I limit myself to writing on those days, because I don't really believe in that, and sometimes I'll be surprised, but I have a good sense of whether I'm really in that flow, which is funny at the moment because at SMU and in the graduate liberal studies department, I'm teaching this class on creativity in the artistic process. So we've been exploring these ideas a lot throughout the whole semester.
Yeah, for me, I think there's multiple feelings. Some of it is like an absolute stillness. It feels like I can hear the buzz of the universe. Like you hear, like for me, I can, when I'm in when it connects, even if I don't understand the poem, it'll just be still. And I'll be like, okay, yeah. But there's also something I started doing because I started wearing a watch that has a heart rate monitor. And what I notice is when I'm writing, my heart rate is the lowest. It's low. It's as low as when I'm sleeping, if not lower sometimes. And so that's like, so it's really quite meditative. So like my heart, like, so generally my heart rate resting is around 47, 46 when I'm sleeping, sometimes 43. And I've seen it when I'm writing get down into the 30s. And so for me, there's this like meditative, real stillness that I'm looking for. And sometimes that, like, the feeling is you have to wait for the line. I was working on a poem that had like rhymed quatrains recently because I was playing around with some Auden, and they would only come in like one quatrain a day. And I just had to be, okay, that's how it's coming. So there's that feeling. But there's also sometimes for me, I'm unsettled. Like I just feel like kind of like I've been rushed through the door of something. You know how you like, you have to like, I always think you're going to a wedding and you're late, right? I have that feeling sometimes. And that is a really interesting space because that means that did something for which I really have no clue about in the poem. And I can't figure it out then. And so I have to actually give it like months. And then when I come back, I wait for to see if I feel that stillness again. But yeah, those are sort of the feelings. I always think of The Big Lebowski. Do y'all know that movie? It's a Coen movie. And remember when the dude is drinking his White Russian and he gets in this like yoga pose and he just does that? That to me is the end of a poem. Just the dude, like, that is like, I'm like, yeah, that's like the dude. That's what I need. That's what the poem needs to feel. And then of course you get hit in the face, right? That's revision, right? So yeah.
That's sweet. One more question. We should probably. Okay, let's give all our poets a hand.